3 years ago, this airline had never operated a wide-body jet. Today, it flies nonstop to Tokyo, Seoul, London, and Rome. And it got there by making 2 acquisitions that the entire industry said were financial suicide. The first cost $4 billion total. Wall Street said it was money the airline would never recover. The second was $1.9 billion for a bankrupt carrier that most analysts thought was past saving. Both times, the same verdict from every corner of the financial press. Too risky, too expensive, and far too ambitious for a regional carrier from Seattle. That airline is Alaska Airlines. And the question this video answers is not just how Alaska survived those bets, but what it was actually building toward. Because the answer transforms everything you thought you knew about one of the most underestimated carriers in North America. Underneath those 2 deals lies a strategy that is only now coming fully into view. And by the end of this video, you will hopefully see exactly what that strategy is. Mcgee arrived in Alaska in 1929 as a stowaway on a ship. Not a traveler, not an investor. A stowaway who scraped by before as a miner, a dishwasher, and a fur trader. And in 1932, painting Mcgee Airways on the side of a 3-seat Stinson airplane and beginning to fly cargo and passengers between Anchorage and Bristol Bay. The state of Alaska was his entire market, a territory larger than Texas, California, and Montana combined, with almost no roads and a population that in most places had no other way to move people or goods at all. Now, that origin matters far more than it first appears. Alaska Airlines was not built on vision in the conventional sense. It was built on necessity, on serving places that had no other options. And that founding instinct would shape how the airline made decisions for the next 9 decades. Through a series of mergers with other small Alaskan carriers across the 1930s and early 40s, the operation grew into Alaska Airlines in 1944, and it spent the following decades steadily extending its network southward, from Anchorage to Seattle and then down the Pacific coast, building one of the most loyal customer bases in the industry through its mileage plan program, which consistently outranked those of carriers twice its size. By the early 2000s, Alaska Airlines had built something solid and hard-earned, a dominant Seattle hub, strong margins for a carrier of its scale, a customer satisfaction record that regularly placed it above airlines with far greater resources. But then, between 2008 and 2013, the US airline industry underwent the most dramatic consolidation in its modern history, and the position Alaska Airlines had spent decades building suddenly looked far more fragile than anyone had expected. Delta absorbed Northwest. United took Continental. American merged with US Airways. In the space of 5 years, 4 carriers came to control more than 80% of the US travel market, leaving Alaska Airlines with roughly 6% of domestic capacity and a seat at a table that the Big Four had fundamentally redesigned around their own scale. Brad Tilden, who became CEO of Alaska Air Group in 2012, was an accountant by training and a numbers man by instinct. What his financial analysis told him was both clear and uncomfortable. In an industry structured this way, standing still was not a neutral choice, but the slowest possible way to lose. But what exactly was the alternative? That question would define everything that came next. The answer arrived in the spring of 2016 as a bidding war over Virgin America, the California-based carrier known for its mood, lighting, and technology-forward cabins. It had routes along the transcontinental corridor that Alaska Airlines didn't operate, terminal space and landing gates at the most congested and financially important airports in the country, and a rival bidder in JetBlue, an East Coast carrier that had been building aggressively toward a West Coast presence for years. Losing Virgin to JetBlue was not simply a missed opportunity. It would have handed a serious competitor the exact infrastructure it needed to challenge Alaska Airlines directly on its home turf. The bidding drove the price to $57 per share, against a stock that had been trading between $26 and $37 for the previous 12 months, including debt and aircraft leasing obligations, $4 billion in total. Alaska agreed to pay it, and the reaction from analysts and aviation media was almost unanimous. The airline had massively overpaid. A Warwick Business School strategy professor told the press that the price had been pushed to levels that would make it difficult to justify. One published financial analysis concluded it was very unlikely for the company to make its money back. The deal closed in December 2016. What followed deepened the skepticism further. Alaska Airlines retired the entire Virgin America brand, replaced the Airbus A320 fleet with its own Boeing 737 jets, shut down the Virgin Loyalty program, and absorbed everything into the existing Alaska operation. $4 billion, and the thing it had paid for was barely visible from the outside. But Ben Minicucci, then Alaska's chief operating officer and later its CEO, was blunt about what the airline had actually purchased. 4 airlines dominate the domestic market share, he said. People asked, would you do it again? The answer is absolutely yes. San Francisco as a second major West Coast hub. Gates at airports that could not be replicated from scratch at any price. A permanent barrier that kept those assets out of JetBlue's hands. The West Coast was secured. But that still leaves the question that none of the coverage of the Virgin deal ever fully answered. Because if $4 billion was the price of locking down the West Coast, why would the same airline then spend nearly $2 billion on a bankrupt Pacific carrier that most of the industry had already written off? What could Hawaiian Airlines possibly have that was worth that kind of money to a carrier whose entire mainline fleet ran on Boeing 737 narrow-body jets, aircraft that physically cannot reach Tokyo or Seoul or London, no matter how efficiently you operate them? The answer to that question is what nobody clearly explained when the deal was announced. And it is the direct reason Alaska Airlines is now flying to Europe for the first time in its history. And the timing of that second bet is what makes it almost impossible to explain from the outside. Alaska announced the Hawaiian deal in December of 2023. 1 month later, on January 5th of 2024, a door plug tore off the side of a Boeing 737 MAX 9 as it climbed out of Portland, leaving a hole in the fuselage and forcing an emergency landing. Luckily, every one of the 171 passengers and 6 crew on board survived.
Boeing CEO says the company is, quote, acknowledging its mistake after the Alaska Airlines mid-air door blowout last week. This comes as Alaska and United Airlines, the only 2 U.S. carriers to fly the Boeing 737 MAX 9, say they found loose bolts inside several other door plugs on the jets.
But within a day, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded every 737 MAX 9 in the country, 65 of them belonging to Alaska Airlines, and the airline lost around $160 million in a single quarter from canceled flights and a fleet it was no longer allowed to operate. Consider what that meant. The most ambitious acquisition in Alaska's history was sitting on the table, waiting for shareholder votes and regulatory clearance, and at that exact moment, the airline's core fleet was frozen on the ground and its name was on every front page in the world for the worst possible reason. Most companies facing a crisis of that scale would have paused everything and waited for calmer conditions before committing another $1.9 billion to anything. Well, not Alaska Airlines. They did the exact opposite. It returned its MAX 9 fleet to service inside 3 weeks, pushed Boeing for compensation, and recovered the full $160 million it had lost, and kept the Hawaiian deal moving without missing a step. Shareholders approved it in February. And while the rest of the world watched a safety crisis, Alaska kept its eyes fixed on the one asset that would change what the airline was capable of forever. So what did Alaska see in a carrier the rest of the industry had written off? By the time Alaska came calling, Hawaiian Airlines was deep in the red, posting heavy losses quarter after quarter and trading near record lows. And the conventional reading was that the carrier had been caught by the normalization of post-pandemic leisure demand, overwhelmed by a cost structure that worked in boom conditions and did not work in calmer ones. Most airlines looked at Hawaiian and saw a company in structural decline. Alaska looked at the same carrier and saw a wide-body fleet and a Pacific gateway. Here is the logic the headline numbers never fully captured. Alaska's network was strong along the West Coast and competitive across the continental United States, but it had a hard ceiling built into its fleet. The Boeing 737 is one of the most efficient narrow-body jets in commercial service, and it is excellent on routes up to 5 or 6 hours. Tokyo Narita is 9.5 hours from Seattle. Seoul Incheon is 10.5. London Heathrow is 9.5. None of those routes are possible on a Boeing 737, and Alaska had no wide-body aircraft at all. Without wide-bodies, there was no credible path to long-haul international flying. Hawaiian's fleet of Airbus A330-200 aircraft changed that equation completely. When the acquisition completed in September 2024 for $1.9 billion in total, Alaska inherited not just the inter-island routes and the Honolulu hub, but the crew bases, the operating certificates, and the Pacific Route Authority that it needed to begin functioning as a true international carrier. The deal was infrastructure, not rescue, and the difference matters enormously when you understand what Alaska Airlines had been planning around it. The Pacific results have been striking. Seattle to Tokyo, Narita launched in May 2025, operated on Hawaiian's Airbus A330-200. Seattle to Seoul Incheon followed in September 2025, 5 times a week on the same aircraft type. Both routes exceeded 90% load factors within their first months of operation. The Tokyo service reached profitability in less than 1 year, a result that established long-haul carriers would consider highly competitive for any brand new intercontinental route. And then came Europe, and this is where the story moves into territory that even Alaska's most informed observers did not predict. In April 2026, Alaska Airlines launched its first ever transatlantic route, Seattle to Rome, Fiumicino, on the Boeing 787-9, with 34 enclosed business class suites, featuring fully lie-flat beds. The route was originally announced as 4 flights a week, but demand was strong enough that Alaska upgraded it to daily seasonal service before it even launched. On May 21st of 2026, Seattle to London, Heathrow followed daily year-round service, also on the Boeing 787-9, entering what Alaska itself describes as the largest intercontinental market from Seattle, with over 400 passengers traveling between the two cities every single day before Alaska even arrived. A week later, on May 28th of 2026, seasonal daily service to Reykjavik launched on the Boeing 737 MAX 8, opening onward access to Scandinavia and Northern Europe through Icelanderair's hub at Keflavik. 3 European destinations in 5 weeks, from an airline that 4 years ago had never touched a wide-body jet. But the geography and the aircraft are only part of the story, because underneath the route expansion sits the financial engine that funds the whole machine. Alaska Airlines reaps more than $1 billion annually from its co-branded credit card partnership with Bank of America. I will repeat that. $1 billion. Not from selling seats, but from cards. Revenue that does not fall when fuel prices rise or when bookings soften, because it is driven by spending behavior rather than load factors. The Hawaiian acquisition nearly doubled Alaska's total loyalty membership in a single transaction. And the rebranded Atmos Rewards program, which launched in August 2025, is designed to compound that base further with every new international route that draws high-value long-haul travelers into the network. Every Tokyo passenger is a potential cardholder. Every London booking extends the loyalty footprint. The machine feeds itself. The numbers reflect a transformed airline operating at a completely new scale. Alaska Air Group's combined operating revenue for 2025 reached $14.2 billion, a 23% increase over the prior year. The combined fleet stood at 413 aircraft. In January 2026, Alaska placed the largest order in its history, 105 Boeing 737-10 aircraft, and 5 Boeing 787 aircraft, with options for 35 additional 737-10s, targeting a fleet of 475 aircraft by 2030 and over 550 by 2035. Corporate travel managed through Alaska grew 19% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2026. Atmos Rewards membership and co-brand credit card remuneration both grew double digits year-on-year in the same period. This is the output of 2 decades of calculated decisions and 2 acquisitions that the market called reckless. But the bet is not finished, and the risks ahead are specific and real. The first quarter of 2026 delivered a difficult set of results. Alaska Air Group reported a net loss of $193 million for the 3 months ending March 31st of 2026, with unit costs rising 6.3%. The airline suspended its full year 2026 earnings per share guidance entirely, a clear signal that management cannot see clearly enough through the current macroeconomic environment to commit to a forward number. For a carrier in the middle of the most ambitious transformation in its history, that kind of uncertainty is not a comfortable place to be. The integration itself remains the largest single operational risk. 2 labor agreements, 2 maintenance organizations, 2 seniority structures, and 2 reservation systems do not combine cleanly or quickly, and the unified reservations platform only went live in April 2026. And the competition is already responding directly. Delta, which dominates the Trans-Pacific market and holds deep corporate relationships across the West Coast, answered Alaska's European push by launching its own Seattle to Rome service in early May 2026, 4 times a week, alongside a new Seattle to Barcelona route, both on the Airbus A330-900. That brings Delta's transatlantic network from Seattle to 5 destinations, backed by a new lounge and priority access to 18 gates at the airport. The effect on fares was immediate. On the Seattle to London route, round-trip prices that had averaged around $1,100 before Alaska Airlines entered have fallen to as low as $740, a direct sign that the margin Alaska is chasing on these prestige routes is under pressure from the moment it arrives. Running a network that spans short-haul domestic narrow-body flying, long-haul Pacific wide-body routes on the Airbus A330, and new transatlantic operations on the Boeing 787-9 requires a level of operational complexity that Alaska Airlines has never managed at this scale. The carrier's debt-to-capitalization ratio of 61% limits the financial cushion available if integration costs run ahead of plan. The $1 billion incremental profit target under the Alaska Accelerate plan is aimed at 2027, and management has said synergies from the Hawaiian integration are tracking ahead of initial expectations. But a carrier managing this volume of change, in an uncertain economy, with a narrow window to prove its new global model works, has limited room to absorb surprises. The next 2 years will answer the question that 2 acquisitions and a decade of strategic positioning has been building toward. Here is my honest take on Alaska Airlines. Mcgee arrived in the Alaskan wilderness with nothing and built an airline because necessity left him no other option. Nearly a century later, Ben Minicucci is making bets from the same instinct at a vastly different scale. You either build something that the giants in this industry cannot easily step over, or you surrender the ground you are standing on by inches. 2 acquisitions the market called overpriced. 2 moments when the easiest thing would have been to pull back and play it safe. 1 argument made twice that staying small in a market owned by 4 dominant carriers is the most dangerous strategy of all. Alaska now flies to Tokyo, Seoul, Rome, London, and Reykjavik, with its largest fleet order in history on the books and a loyalty program generating over $1 billion a year from card spend alone. Whether the financial weight of that ambition can be sustained through the integration headwinds still ahead is the question this story has not yet answered. So here's what I want to know from you. Is Alaska Airlines building the most compelling transformation story in American aviation right now? Or is there a point at which the ambition of a carrier this size simply outpaces what its balance sheet can realistically support? Drop your answer in the comments below because that debate is worth having. If this is the kind of aviation analysis you come to this channel for, hit like on this video right now and subscribe to Explained. That one click, or maybe two, helps me and this channel more than you know. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.